Under the fractured moon, a single drop of blood traced the curve of her exile like a lover's farewell. Ceres Dawnfall stumbled through the whispering pines, the wind carving icy sigils across her skin. The forest of Eldridge was a labyrinth of silvered shadows, where the snow fell in relentless veils, muffling the world to a hush broken only by her ragged breaths. She clutched the silver amulet at her throat, a relic from her mother, etched with the crescent of the goddess, its chain now slick with the frost of her tears. It was all she had left after the rejection, a cold weight against the hollow ache in her chest. The pack had cast her out at dawn, their howls echoing like judgments from the peaks. Thorn Blackridge, the beta who had once vowed to claim her, had turned away first, his eyes gleaming with the pack's disdain. "Unworthy," he had snarled, his voice a blade through the gathering mist. Ceres had been marked as barren, a whisper of prophecy that branded her useless in the eyes of the Stoneclaw clan. No pups, no future, only shame. They had stripped her of her furs, leaving her in a threadbare shift that clung like a second skin to her shivering form. Banished to the wilds, where the border wolves prowled and the endless winter claimed the weak. Her feet bled into the snow, each step a crimson bloom that the wind scattered like forgotten oaths. The cold seeped into her bones, a relentless companion that mirrored the frost in her heart. Why fight it? The goddess had turned her face away, leaving Ceres to wander as a ghost among the living. She collapsed against a jagged rock, the amulet pressing into her palm as she curled inward. Memories clawed at her. The warmth of the pack fires, the rhythmic chants under the full moon, the fleeting hope of belonging. Now only the howl of solitude answered. Night deepened. The moon's glow filtering through the canopy like spilled milk on marble. Ceres rose, driven by a stubborn spark she could not name. The path wound upward, toward the forbidden ridges where the Stoneclaw kings were said to hunt alone, seeking visions in the solitude. Legends spoke of Malric Stoneclaw, the Alpha King, whose reign was shadowed by loss, the great war that had claimed his mate, leaving him a hollow throne. But legends were for the worthy. Ceres was adrift, a leaf in the storm. The wind carried a distant rumble, not thunder, but the thunder of pause. She froze, her senses sharpening against the primal fear that coiled in her gut. Shadows shifted in the tree line, eyes like embers in the dark. Rogues? Or worse, enforcers come to ensure her exile was permanent. She pressed the amulet to her lips, whispering a prayer to the Lunar Mother. "Guide me through this veil, or let me fade into it." But the night had other designs. A guttural snarl rent the air, followed by the clash of steel and the wet tear of flesh. Ceres's heart hammered as she crept forward, drawn by an invisible thread. Through the underbrush, she glimpsed it. A lone figure, broad-shouldered and cloaked in midnight fur, locked in combat with a pack of snarling intruders. Their blades glinted under the moon, arcs of silver death. The man fought like a tempest, his movements a blur of raw power, but blood streaked his side, darkening the snow. He was no ordinary wolf. The insignia on his cloak, a carved stone claw, marked him as royal. Malric Stoneclaw himself, the Alpha King, cornered in the wilds. Why here, away from his guards? Whispers of his melancholy hunts surfaced in her mind. He sought the edge of madness to drown the ghosts of his past. One attacker lunged, blade raised for the killing blow. Ceres's breath caught, an inexplicable pull seizing her. She could flee, vanish into the night as her exile demanded. But the amulet burned against her skin, warm for the first time, as if the goddess stirred within it. Fear and curiosity warred in her chest. Fear of the king who embodied the hierarchy that had broken her, curiosity for the vulnerability in his shadowed eyes. The blade descended. Without thought, Ceres surged forward, her body a shield born of instinct. She threw herself between them. the impact jarring her bones as the steel grazed her shoulder instead of his throat. Pain bloomed, hot and fierce, but she held her ground, her cry lost in the fray. Malric whirled, his golden eyes locking onto hers, eyes that held the weight of empires and the fracture of a soul. For a heartbeat, the world stilled, the snow swirling around them like a sacred veil. Who was this Omega, bold enough to stand where armies fell? And why did her touch, even through the chaos, feel like the first thaw after eternal winter? The attackers faltered, sensing the shift, but Malric's snarl shook the pines. With a surge of alpha fury, he dispatched the nearest foe, blood spraying across the white expanse. Cerys staggered, the wound weeping crimson that matched the king's own. He caught her as she fell, his arms a cage of iron and unintended gentleness. "Foolish one," he growled, voice rough as gravel under frost. "Why?" She met his gaze, the amulet pulsing between them like a shared heartbeat. "Because some wounds call to others," she whispered, the words slipping free before reason could cage them. The remaining shadows retreated into the night, their howls fading like defeated echoes. Malric lifted her effortlessly, his warmth seeping through her chilled form as he carried her toward the hidden caves beyond the ridge. The bond was not yet forged, but in that moment of sacrifice glimpsed, the seeds of denial took root. His guilt a barrier, her exile a chain. Yet the moon watched, silver and unyielding, promising that redemption waited in the fire to come. The cave's mouth yawned like a wound in the mountain's flank, swallowing them whole as Malric carried Cerys into its shadowed embrace. The air inside was thick with the scent of damp stone and ancient moss, a respite from the howling gale that clawed at the entrance. He laid her down on a ledge of smoothed granite, the silver amulet slipping from her fingers to clatter softly against the rock. Its crescent gleamed faintly in the dim light filtering from outside, a silent witness to the blood now staining her shift, a deep red that pooled beneath her shoulder like spilled wine under moonlight. Pain throbbed through Cerys's body, a fire that licked at her edges, but it was nothing compared to the storm in her chest. Why had she done it? The question echoed in her mind as she watched him tear a strip from his cloak, his large hands steady despite the gash across his ribs. Malric Stoneclaw, the Alpha King, whose name evoked thunder over the peaks, knelt before her like a supplicant. His golden eyes, rimmed with the weariness of battles unseen, avoided hers as he pressed the cloth to her wound. The touch was clinical, born of necessity, yet it sent a shiver through her, not from cold, but from the unintended warmth of his skin against her chilled flesh. "You should not have interfered," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the stone. Guilt etched his features, deepening the lines carved by years of command and loss. The war that had taken his mate had left him a king in name only, haunted by the ghosts of choices that echoed in his solitude. He had come to these ridges to escape the court's whispers, to let the wilds judge him where his pack could not. And now, this Omega, cast out, like so many he had failed to protect, had thrown herself into his fray. Cerys winced as he bound the wound, the pressure forcing a gasp from her lips. The cave's chill seeped deeper, wrapping around her like the pack's rejection, but she met his gaze when he finally looked up. "And you should not be alone in the dark," she replied, her words soft yet edged with the defiance that had survived her exile. Fear lingered in her veins, a primal instinct screaming that alphas like him devoured the weak. Yet curiosity bloomed alongside it, drawn to the fracture in his armor, the way his shoulders bore the weight of a crown not worn lightly. Outside, the wind rose to a furious wail, carrying the distant snarls of the retreating attackers. But they were not gone. Cerys could feel it in the prickle along her spine, the amulet warming against her chest once more. Malric tensed, his head tilting as if listening to the night's secrets. "They will return," he said, rising to bar the entrance with fallen branches and loose stones. His movements were fluid, a predator's grace marred only by the hitch in his breath from his own injury. Blood seeped through his bandages, dark against the gray of his fur-lined cloak, but he ignored it, his focus sharpening on the shadows beyond. She pushed herself up, ignoring the dizzying pull of blood loss, and crawled to his side. The cave was no fortress, merely a hollow in the earth, its walls etched with faint lunar runes from forgotten pilgrims. Torchlight was absent. Instead, Malric struck flint against steel, coaxing a small fire to life in a nest of dry twigs. Flames danced, casting flickering gold across his stern face and illuminating the scar that bisected his jaw. A memento from the war, they said, when betrayal had cut deeper than any blade. The warmth spread tentatively, chasing the frost from her bones, but it could not thaw the wariness between them. "Why do they hunt you?" Saris asked, her voice barely above the crackle of the fire. She drew her knees to her chest, the amulet dangling like a pendulum between her fingers. Its silver caught the firelight, reflecting the moon's distant vigil outside. Malric's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the entrance. "Old enemies, rivals who scent weakness in my court." He did not elaborate, but the weight of his words hung heavy, the political games of the Stoneclaw realm, where alphas vied for power through whispers and blades. Thorn Blackridge's face flickered in her mind, his betrayal a smaller echo of such treachery. Her own pack's disdain felt trivial against the king's burdens, yet it bound them in shared isolation. A low growl rumbled from the night, closer now. Saris's heart stuttered, the fire's heat suddenly insufficient against the encroaching cold. Malric positioned himself before her, his body a shield of muscle and resolve, but she saw the flicker of doubt in his stance, the guilt that made him question his strength. Without a word, she rose, grabbing a jagged shard of rock from the floor. It was foolish, an omega arming against wolves forged in battle, but the amulet pulsed hotter, urging her forward. The attackers breached the barrier with a crash, 3 shadows bursting into the cave's glow. Rogue betas, their eyes wild with the scent of blood and opportunity. The first lunged at Malric, claws extended, but the king met him with a savage twist, hurling the foe into the wall with a crack of bone. The second circled, blade drawn, forcing Malric to divide his attention. Saris's breath came in shallow bursts, the wound screaming as she moved, but instinct overrode fear. She swung the rock at the third assailant who slipped past, aiming for her throat. It connected with a thud, staggering him, and she followed with a desperate kick, her bare foot connecting with his knee. Malric dispatched the second with a roar that shook the flames higher, blood spraying across the stone in arcs of crimson. He turned to her just as the wounded rogue recovered, lunging anew. Time slowed. Saris saw the blades glint, felt the amulet's heat surge like a warning from the goddess. She stepped forward, not as a victim, but as an equal in the fray, shoving the attacker off balance with her body. Malric's arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her back as he ended the threat with a final, merciful snap. Panting, they collapsed against the wall, the fire sputtering as if exhausted by the violence. The cave reeked of sweat and iron, the silence broken only by their ragged breaths. Malric's hand lingered on her side, steadying her, and in that touch, empathy stirred, his guilt mirroring her shame, forging a fragile thread. He searched her eyes, the denial in his posture softening. "You fight like one who has nothing left to lose," he said, voice laced with reluctant admiration. Saris touched the amulet, its warmth now a shared ember between them. "Or everything to claim," she whispered, the bond whispering of possibilities neither dared name. The moon's light crept in, silvering the bloodstains, as the night held its breath for what dawn might reveal. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. Dawn's first blush bled through the cave's jagged mouth, painting the bloodied stones in hues of rose and frost. Ceres stirred, the ache in her shoulder a dull roar beneath the makeshift bandage, but it was the king's proximity that anchored her to wakefulness. Malric sat across the dying fire, his silhouette etched against the paling night, golden eyes fixed on the entrance as if willing the shadows to stay at bay. The amulet rested heavy against her chest, its silver crescent now bearing faint smears of their shared blood, a mark that pulsed with the rhythm of her slowing heart. She watched him in silence, the fire's embers casting flickering shadows across his face, lines deepened by the night's toll, the scar on his jaw gleaming like a silver vein. Guilt clung to him like the cave's damp chill, a weight she recognized in her own bones, forged in the pack's cold dismissal. He had not slept. She could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the way his fingers flexed against his knee, as if ready to summon claws from memory alone. Why had he not cast her aside? An Omega, broken and exiled, was no ally to a king haunted by his failures. The wind outside shifted, carrying the faint, acrid scent of smoke, distant but deliberate. Malric's head snapped up, nostrils flaring. "They circle closer," he murmured, voice gravel rough from the hours of vigil. He rose, every movement a testament to restrained power, the gash on his ribs pulling a subtle wince he tried to hide. Ceres pushed to her feet, the cave spinning briefly before steadying, her bare soles scraping against the cold stone. Pain lanced through her, but she swallowed it, stepping to his side. The amulet warmed, a subtle thrum against her skin, as if the goddess whispered of trials yet to come. "We cannot stay," she said, her words threading through the crackle of rekindled flames. He glanced at her then, truly looked, and in his eyes she saw the fracture. The Alpha King, who had led armies to victory, now felled by the ghost of a mate lost to betrayal's blade. Empathy stirred in her chest, unbidden, a bridge across the chasm of their worlds. She had shielded him not from duty, but from the echo of her own isolation. He, in turn, had not abandoned her to the wilds, bound by a code that demanded protection, even for the unworthy. Malric nodded, gathering what remained of his cloak to drape over her shoulders. Its fur was matted with blood and earth, but it carried his scent, musk and pine, and the faint tang of iron, a warmth that seeped into her like forbidden solace. "The ridges lead to the hidden pass," he said, gesturing to a narrow crevice at the cave's rear, veiled by hanging roots. "If we move now, before the sun crests fully, we may outpace them." His tone brooked no argument, yet there was no command in it, only the weariness of one who had learned that solitude was a sharper blade than any rival's. They slipped into the crevice, the stone walls closing like a lover's embrace, cool and unyielding. Ceres followed close, her hand brushing the amulet for guidance, its chain a lifeline in the pressing dark. The air grew thicker, laced with the mineral bite of underground streams, and the distant drip of water echoed like hesitant heartbeats. Above, the wind howled through unseen vents, a mournful chorus that masked their steps. Malric led with predatory silence, his body a shield that parted the shadows, but she sensed the toll. His breaths came shallower, the wound sapping his strength. Hours blurred into a tense crawl, the world reduced to the scrape of boots on stone and the shared rhythm of their caution. When they emerged, it was into a sheltered hollow ringed by snow-laden pines, the sun a pale disk veiled by clouds. The refuge was fleeting, a shallow overhang of rock fringed with ice that dripped like melting tears. Malric kindled another fire, small and smokeless, using tinder from his pouch. Ceres sank beside it, the flame's heat coaxing color back to her cheeks, but her eyes never left him. He cleaned his wound with water from a nearby trickle, his movements deliberate, revealing the map of scars that crisscrossed his torso, testaments to wars where mercy had been a luxury he could not afford. "Why do you bear this alone?" she asked. her voice soft as the falling flakes beyond their shelter. The question hung between them, intimate as a confession under the moon's gaze. Malric paused, the cloth in his hand dripping crimson into the snow. His guilt was a living thing, coiling in the set of his jaw, the flicker of pain, not born of flesh. "A king who fails his own cannot lead," he replied, eyes distant, fixed on the fire's dance. "The war took Alara, my mate, because I trusted the wrong shadow. Thorn's kin whisper of it still, plotting in the court's depths. I hunt these ridges to silence the voices, or to let them claim me." Cerys's heart twisted, the amulet burning hotter, as if echoing the fire's truth. Thorn Blackridge, his name was a thorn in her memory, the beta whose rejection had sealed her fate. "The same shadows that cast me out," she whispered, drawing closer. The warmth of the flames mingled with his, bridging the space. She reached out, hesitating, then pressed her palm to his arm, feeling the tremor beneath the muscle. Empathy bloomed into something deeper, a bond forged not in instinct's fire, but in the quiet choice to share the weight. He did not pull away. Instead, his hand covered hers, rough and calloused, holding it against the heat of his skin. "You shielded a stranger," he said, voice laced with wonder and denial. "Why risk the little you have left?" The question was his own unraveling, the king's armor cracking under her gaze. "Because Exile teaches that some chains are illusions," she replied, her eyes meeting his golden ones, unflinching. The wind rose, carrying the faint howl of pursuit, closer, insistent, but in that moment the world narrowed to the spark between them. The amulet glowed faintly, silver light threading through their joined hands, a symbol of wounds that called to one another. Blood and fire and the moon's eternal watch wove their fragile alliance, empathy hardening into resolve. They were no longer alone. The bond whispered of strength in mercy, a revelation waiting just beyond the storm. Yet the howls grew nearer, shadows stirring in the tree line, and Malric rose, pulling her with him. The refuge had bought them breath, but the trial demanded more. A stand not as king and outcast, but as equals in the face of the encroaching night. The howls clawed at the edges of the hollow, a chorus of hunger and retribution that slithered through the pines like smoke from a dying pyre. Cerys pressed against the overhang's icy lip, the wind whipping her hair into silvered strands that stung her face like needles forged in the goddess's forge. Malric stood before her, his body a bastion of shadowed muscle, the fire's embers at his feet casting elongated silhouettes that danced like warring spirits. The amulet thrummed against her chest, no longer a mere relic but a living pulse, syncing with the frantic rhythm of her heart. Blood from their wounds mingled in the snow at their feet, dark rivulets tracing paths toward the encroaching shadows, as if the earth itself drank their shared defiance. She could feel it building, a pressure behind her eyes, a whisper uncoiling in her veins like moonlight spilling over frozen rivers. The exile had stripped her bare, but in this fragile sanctuary, something ancient stirred, unbidden and fierce. Malric's golden gaze flicked to her, concern etching deeper into the lines of his face, the scar on his jaw a stark reminder of betrayals that mirrored her own. "Stay behind me," he commanded, voice low and threaded with the gravel of exhaustion. But there was no alpha's bark in it, only the plea of one who had lost too much to lose again. The first rogue burst from the tree line, a beta with fur matted by frost and fury, his claws raking the air as he charged. Malric met him mid-leap, their bodies colliding in a thunderous clash that sent snow exploding upward in crystalline veils. Fangs snapped, blood sprayed, hot and metallic, painting the white ground in strokes of crimson under the climbing sun. Cerys's breath caught, the metallic tang filling her lungs, mingling with the pine's sharp bite and the underlying musk of Malric's exertion. Two more followed, circling like vultures scenting weakness, their eyes gleaming with the feral gleam of Thorn's ilk, ambition cloaked in savagery. Malric fought with the precision of a king forged in fire, dispatching the first with a twist that cracked bone like dry branches underfoot. But the numbers pressed. A blade whistled through the air, grazing his thigh, drawing a fresh line of red that seeped into the snow. He staggered, just a fraction, and in that heartbeat, Cerys's world tilted. The amulet ignited, not with heat, but with a clarity that pierced the chaos like a lunar beam through storm clouds. Visions flooded her, paths unseen, threads of fate weaving through the fray. She saw the rogues' intent, their hidden flanks, the hidden crevice in the ridge that could turn the tide. It was no mere instinct, it was a gift, buried deep in her bloodline. The Pathfinder's sight, the ability to reveal the unseen roads of destiny, a power the pack had dismissed as barren madness. "No," she breathed, the word escaping as she surged forward, her body moving before thought could chain it. The wound in her shoulder screamed, a white-hot agony that blurred her vision, but the amulet guided her hand. She snatched a fallen branch, heavy with frost, and swung it not at the nearest foe, but at the shadow lurking beyond, a fourth attacker poised to strike from the blind side. The wood connected with a solid thud, the rogue crumpling into the snow with a yelp that echoed off the rocks. Malric whirled, surprise flashing in his eyes as he saw her, the Omega who had shielded him once already, now unveiling a force he could not comprehend. The remaining betas faltered, their snarls fracturing into uncertainty. Cerys felt the gift unfurl fully, a cascade of silver light blooming from the amulet, invisible to all but her. Yet its essence rippled outward, illuminating the hollow's secrets. She pointed, voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. "There, the overhang's edge crumbles. Lure them to it." Malric's gaze locked on hers, the golden depths widening with realization. In that instant, he saw it too, the fracture in the rock, a trap veiled by the wind's howl. He nodded, a silent accord forged in the fire of battle, and baited the charge. The rogues lunged as one, driven by bloodlust, but Malric danced back, drawing them toward the precipice. Cerys's vision sharpened the path, the exact step. The shift of weight, and she cried out, "Now!" He pivoted, the lead beta overshooting into the crumbling ledge. Stone gave way with a groan, swallowing the foe in a cascade of ice and earth, his howl cut short by the abyss below. The others hesitated, terror replacing greed, and Malric struck, swift, merciless, his claws ending their threat in sprays of blood that steamed against the cold. Silence descended, broken only by the wind's mournful sigh and the distant rumble of settling snow. Cerys sank to her knees, the amulet cooling against her skin, its crescent now etched with faint, glowing runes that faded like dying stars. Exhaustion clawed at her, the gift's manifestation draining her like a river after flood. But triumph flickered in her chest, a rebirth from the ashes of rejection. Malric approached, bloodied but unbowed, dropping to one knee before her. His hand cupped her face, thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a tenderness that belied his warrior's frame. "What are you?" he whispered, voice laced with awe and the dawning light of destiny. The guilt that had shadowed him cracked, revealing the king beneath, the one who recognized the key to his fractured throne. She met his eyes, the silver amulet dangling between them like a bridge across realms. "The Pathfinder," she said softly, the words tasting of ancient truths. "Born to guide the lost roads, to reveal what the moon conceals. The pack called it curse, barren as my womb, but it chose this moment. For you." The revelation hung in the air, heavy as the snow-laden branches above, binding them in a web of fate neither could deny. Malric's fingers tightened, pulling her closer, the warmth of his breath mingling with hers. In her gift, he saw salvation, not conquest, but the moral compass to navigate the court's treacheries, the path to redeem his past sins. Thorn's shadows loomed larger now, but with her sight, they could be unraveled. Yet the wind carried fresh howls, reinforcements drawn by the scent of blood and upheaval. Malric rose, helping her to her feet, their hands lingering in a vow unspoken. The amulet pulsed once more, a beacon in the gathering storm, whispering that destiny was no chain, but a choice, to walk the revealed path together, or let guilt and exile claim them both. The sun climbed higher, gilding the bloodied snow in gold as the ridge trembled with the approach of judgment. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your. The moon hung low over the ridge like a judge's gavel, its silver light fracturing across the snow-swept plains where the Stoneclaw pack gathered in uneasy vigil. Saris clung to Malric's side as they descended from the hollow, the amulet's warmth a faint anchor against the chill that seeped through her bandages. Her shoulder throbbed with each step, a relentless pulse that echoed the howls drawing nearer. Not the ragged cries of rogues, but the deep, resonant calls of the pack itself. Thorn Blackridge's scent lingered on the wind, sharp as betrayal, mingling with the metallic tang of impending blood. Malric's hand brushed hers, a silent tether forged in the revelation of her gift, but doubt shadowed his golden eyes. The pathfinder's sight had unveiled paths unseen, yet it could not erase the ghosts rising to meet them. They crested the final rise under twilight's bruise, the pack's fires flickering like distant stars fallen to earth. Torches ringed the clearing, their flames casting elongated shadows that writhed across the frost-crusted ground. The Stoneclaw wolves stood in formation, fur bristling under cloaks of gray and black, their breaths clouding the air in communal suspicion. At their center loomed Thorn, no longer the beta of whispers, but elevated in Malric's absence, his frame swollen with false authority, eyes gleaming with the hunger of a rival who had long scented the king's fracture. "Traitor to your own blood," Thorn snarled as they approached, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a claw through flesh. The pack shifted, loyalty torn between the absent monarch and the one who promised swift retribution against the cursed Omega at his side. Saris's heart hammered, the amulet burning against her skin as visions flickered at the edges of her sight. Threads of deceit weaving through the crowd, hidden blades glinting in the firelight. The pack's rejection echoed in her bones, a fresh wound atop the old, barren, unworthy, a shadow to be banished. Yet here she stood, not as exile, but as the one who had guided their king through shadowed passes. Malric halted at the perimeter, his presence a thunderclap that stilled the growls. "I return not as fugitive, but as your alpha," he declared, voice steady despite the guilt coiling in his chest like smoke. His gaze swept the assembly, lingering on Thorn, the architect of his isolation, the one whose kin had betrayed Ilara, whose ambition now poisoned the realm. The air thickened with tension, the wind carrying the faint UIV of distant peaks as if the mountains themselves bore witness. Thorn stepped forward, flanked by enforcers whose claws scraped the snow in warning. "You flee like a whelp, Stoneclaw, dragging this barren witch in your wake. The goddess reviles the weak. Your mate's blood cries for a stronger hand." His words were venom, aimed to shatter Malric's resolve, to ignite the pack's dormant fury. Saris felt the moral chasm yawn beneath them. Forgiveness for the betrayer who mirrored her own casters out, or war that would drown the innocent in blood. Her gift pulsed, revealing the trap, Thorn's signal to his hidden allies. Shadows slinking from the tree line under night's full embrace. The ambush erupted without mercy, the moon's glow turning the snow to a battlefield of silver and crimson. Rogues, Thorn's secret vanguard, burst from the darkness, blades drawn in arcs that sang through the frigid air. The pack erupted in chaos, loyalties fracturing as steel clashed and fangs tore. Malric roared, positioning himself between Saris and the fray, his body a whirlwind of claws and fury. He felled 2 assailants in swift succession, blood spraying hot across the white expanse, steaming as it met the cold. But Thorn pressed the advantage, circling with predatory grace, his blade aimed not for the king alone, but for the bond that threatened his claim. Cerys's vision sharpened, the amulet igniting like a star within her chest. She saw the path, Thorn's strike, veiled by a feint, destined for Malric's unguarded flank. Freedom whispered in her mind, "Flee into the night, reclaim the solitude of exile, let the alphas devour their own." But love, that resisted flame, burned brighter. Redemption not as reward, but as the choice to heal the wound she alone could touch. The blade descended, moonlight glancing off its edge like a lover's cruel farewell. Without hesitation, Cerys lunged, her body a living shield hurled into the arc. The steel bit, deep into her side, a searing agony that bloomed through ribs and lung, tearing a gasp from her throat as she collapsed against Malric. He caught her, his arms encircling her in iron desperation, but she refused to yield. Fingers digging into his fur as blood welled warm and slick between them. "No," she whispered through gritted teeth, her voice a thread of will against the encroaching dark. Pain clawed at her vision, the world blurring to reds and silvers, yet she held on, the amulet pressed between their hearts, its crescent glowing faintly, as if the goddess herself wept silver tears. The pack froze. Torches guttering in the wind, their eyes wide on the tableau, the exiled Omega, gravely wounded, clinging to their king not in submission, but in unbreakable choice. Thorn faltered, blade dripping crimson, his ambition cracking under the weight of witnessed sacrifice. Malric's roar shattered the stillness, a primal fury laced with anguish. He surged forward, cradling her against him, and struck Thorn down, not with killing rage, but a blow that shattered the beta's weapon and felled him to his knees. Blood pooled beneath Cerys, mingling with the snow in a sacred sigil, her breaths shallow rasps that fogged the air. The pack encircled them, howls rising not in judgment, but in awe. The bond born not of hierarchy's chains, but of moral fire, her mercy choosing him over liberty, his guilt yielding to the compassion she embodied. Whispers rippled through the ranks. The pathfinder. She sees the true path. Yet as Malric pressed his cloak to her wound, his golden eyes locking onto hers through the haze, a deeper dilemma unfurled. War hovered on the horizon. Thorn's allies would rally, demanding vengeance or submission. Forgiveness for the traitor, or the bloodshed of retribution. Cerys's hand trembled in his, the amulet's light fading as her strength waned, whispering the ethical precipice. Could love redeem without destroying, or would their union demand a sacrifice greater than flesh? The moon watched, unblinking, as the pack's fate balanced on the edge of her fading breath, the wind carrying the scent of blood and rebirth into the endless night. The torchlight wavered like hesitant breaths in the frozen clearing, casting the pack's faces in stark relief, eyes wide with the shock of what they had witnessed, furred cloaks stirring in the wind that carried the coppery reek of Cerys's blood. She lay cradled in Malric's arms, the world narrowing to the press of his chest against her side, where the blade's bite wept crimson through the sodden cloth. Each inhale was a labored fire, drawing the chill deep into her lungs, but she clung to him, fingers twisted in the fur of his cloak, refusing the pull of darkness. The amulet dangled between them, its silver crescent smeared with their mingled blood, pulsing faintly as if the moon's own heart beat in defiance of her waning strength. Thorn knelt in the snow, disarmed and broken, his ambitious snarl twisted into a grimace of pain and dawning fear. The beta's eyes darted from the fallen Omega to the king, calculating the shift in the pack's tide, the howls that now rose not in challenge, but in a rumbling chorus of uncertainty and reverence. Enforcers circled closer, their claws retracted, breaths clouding the air as they scented the air thick with blood and the electric tang of revelation. Malric's golden gaze burned into Thorn, the Alpha King's fury a contained storm, his body shielding Cerys even as guilt clawed at his resolve. He had failed Alara to betrayal's whisper. Now, this Omega's sacrifice demanded he confront the shadows that had haunted his throne. "Rise," Malric commanded, his voice a low thunder that rolled across the clearing, vibrating through Cerys's bones. Thorn staggered to his feet, blood trickling from his split lip, but the pack held its ground, torches held high to illuminate the moral precipice. Cerys's vision blurred at the edges, the amulet's warmth the only anchor, but her gift flickered alive once more. Fragments of paths unveiling like silver threads in the night. She saw Thorn's web, alliances forged in secret with rival clans beyond the ridges, promises of power traded for the king's head, echoes of the war that had claimed Alara. Freedom tempted her, a whisper to let go, to slip into Exile's quiet embrace where no blade could reach. But love, that hard-won flame, rooted her. Redemption meant choosing him, weaving her sight into his justice, not as servant, but as the compass to his fractured soul. The pack murmured, voices rising like wind through pines, some calling for Thorn's blood, others for the Omega's banishment, fearing her curse that had upended their hierarchy. An elder stepped forward, her fur silvered by moons, eyes sharp as lunar shards. "The goddess marks her chosen in blood and choice," she intoned, gesturing to the amulet's glow. "But what path do you claim, Stoneclaw? Vengeance stains the snow eternal, or does mercy crown the throne?" Her words hung heavy, a philosophical blade piercing the chaos, forcing Malric to face the dilemma that mirrored Cerys's own. Forgive the traitor and risk the court's poison, or unleash war that would devour the innocent, leaving his reign a pyre of guilt anew. Malric's arms tightened around Cerys, her shallow breaths a rhythm against his heart, each one a reminder of the bond forged in sacrifice. He rose slowly, lifting her with him, her weight a sacred burden that steadied his trembling resolve. The pack parted as he carried her toward the central fire, its flames crackling high, casting golden flickers across the bloodied snow. Thorn watched, defiance cracking into desperation, his kin's shadows slinking back into the tree line under the moon's unyielding gaze. "She is no queen!" Thorn spat, voice laced with the bitterness of a rival dethroned by compassion. "An Omega's blood buys nothing but pity. Strike me down, and prove your weakness. Let the clans know the Stoneclaw King bends to a barren ghost." Cerys's hand slipped free, reaching toward Thorn despite the agony lancing through her. The amulet swung, catching the firelight in a prism of silver and red, and her gift surged, a vision of paths diverging, war's crimson flood, swallowing allies and innocents in rivers of blood under the full moon. Or forgiveness, a fragile bridge where Thorn's knowledge unraveled the greater threats, healing the wounds of Alara's loss through mercy's quiet power. Pain blurred her sight, but she forced the words through blood-flecked lips. "Not ghost? Pathfinder. I see the chains you hide, the rivals beyond the peaks, their blades hungering for all of us." Her voice, weak as winter's whisper, carried the weight of truth, the pack falling silent as the elder nodded, recognition dawning in weathered eyes. Malric halted before Thorn, Cerys's blood dripping from his cloak to stain the snow at the beta's feet, a symbolic offering. The wind howled, Wav distant from the mountains, as if the goddess herself urged the choice. Guilt warred in the king's face, the melancholy alpha, marked by duty's iron yoke, now torn between the freedom of swift retribution and the love that demanded compassion's risk. "You betrayed me as you betrayed her," he growled, nodding to Cerys, his free hand clenching into a fist that could end it all. "Alara's blood cries in the wind, and yours would silence it, but she—" His voice fractured, golden eyes meeting Cerys's through the haze of her pain. "She chooses mercy, not for you, but for the pack's soul. What strength is mine, if not to follow that light?" Thorn's defiance crumbled, knees buckling as the pack's howls shifted to a unified rumble, not of war, but of judgment deferred. Malric's choice crystallized, love over liberty's cold solitude, forgiveness as the path to redemption, weaving Cerys's gift into a moral bulwark against the encroaching shadows. He turned from Thorn, binding the beta with chains of silver rune-etched links, a prisoner, to reveal the rival alpha's plots under the moon's watchful eye. The pack encircled them, torches raised in solemn vigil, as Malric carried Cerys to the fire's edge, laying her gently on furs brought forth by loyal hands. Her breaths steadied fractionally, the amulet cooling against her skin, but the ethical wound lingered. Had mercy saved them, or merely delayed the war's inevitable bloom? The flames danced higher, reflecting in her eyes the spiritual precipice, rebirth through choice, or the despair of bonds tested by blood's unquenchable thirst. The night deepened, the moon a silent arbiter, as the pack's fate teetered on the edge of her fading light, whispering of sacrifices yet to come. The fire's glow cradled Cerys like a reluctant lover, its warmth seeping into her chilled limbs as the pack's murmurs wove through the night like threads of uncertain fate. She lay on the furs, the metallic taste of blood lingering on her tongue, each breath a shallow rasp that pulled at the edges of her wound. The amulet rested against her chest, its silver crescent now a vessel of their shared essence, stained with crimson from her side and the faint traces of Malric's healing touch. Pain throbbed in waves, a visceral tide that blurred the torchlit faces encircling her, but beneath it stirred something deeper. A quiet certainty, born not of the goddess's whim, but of the choice she had made in the blade's shadow. Malric knelt beside her, his hands steady as he unpacked herbs from a pouch at his belt, bitter roots crushed into a poultice, their earthy scent mingling with the smoke and the underlying iron of spilled blood. His golden eyes, rimmed with the exhaustion of command, held hers without flinching, the guilt that had shadowed him fracturing like ice under spring's first thaw. Thorn was dragged away by enforcers, his chains clinking like broken oaths, bound for the depths of the Stoneclaw holds where truths would be extracted under the moon's unblinking scrutiny. The pack watched in hushed reverence, their howls silenced, replaced by the wind's low moan through the pines and the distant UIV of wolves calling to the stars. "You should have let me end it," Malric whispered, his voice a rumble against the crackle of flames, as he applied the poultice to her wound. The sting was fierce, a fire that mirrored the one in her veins, but his touch was gentle, fingers tracing the edges of torn flesh with the care of one who knew the cost of every scar. Cerys winced, her hand finding his, the warmth of his skin a bridge across the chasm of their worlds. Exile had taught her the hollowness of solitude, his melancholy, the burden of a crown forged in loss. In shielding him, she had chosen not death, but union, a rebirth where sacrifice became the forge of their bond. The elder approached, her silver fur catching the firelight like moonlight on snow, and knelt to inspect the wound. "The pathfinder's blood sings of the goddess," she murmured, her gnarled fingers brushing the amulet, which pulsed faintly in response. Visions flickered at Cerys's edges, paths of war averted, alliances mended through mercy's fragile weave, the rival clans beyond the ridges turning from blades to uneasy peace under Malric's redeemed rule. But the gift demanded its toll, her strength ebbing like the tide under the waning moon, the wound's poison seeping deeper, whispering of a final sacrifice. Freedom lingered in the shadows, a temptation to release him to his throne alone, sparing the pack the risk of her curse. Yet love, that resisted ember, burned brighter. Redemption was no crown bestowed, but a mutual healing, her life woven into his to mend the fractures of guilt and rejection. Malric's jaw tightened as the elder chanted a low invocation, words in the ancient tongue that summoned the lunar spirits, soft syllables blending with the wind's sigh, drawing silver motes from the night air to dance around the amulet. The pack joined, their voices rising in a harmonious hum, torches held aloft to form a circle of flickering gold against the encroaching dark. Saris felt the pull, a spiritual tide rising within her, the amulet growing hot as if the moon itself poured essence through its chain. Pain-crested, a visceral storm that arched her back, blood welling anew to stain the furs in deep red blooms. Malric held her down, his body a shield once more, forehead pressed to hers, breaths mingling in shared desperation. "Stay with me," he growled, the words laced with the raw edge of a king unraveling. "I have carried ghosts long enough. Do not become one." In that crucible, the choice crystallized. Saris's gift surged, not as vision alone, but as a conduit, a revelation where her essence could bind to his, healing the poison's grip through the amulet's power, but at the cost of her hidden strength, the pathfinder's sight dimmed forever to whispers. Sacrifice or severance. Let the wound claim her, freeing him to rule unburdened, or unite their souls in a bond that transcended hierarchy, her guidance internalized as his moral compass. The pack's chant swelled, the air thick with the scent of pine resin and smoldering herbs, snowflakes drifting like sacred ash to settle on her skin. Her eyes locked on Malric's, seeing the ethical precipice mirrored in his gaze. The alpha who had chosen mercy over vengeance, now facing the ultimate test. Accept her gift's price, or lose the light that had thawed his frozen heart. "I choose us," she breathed, the words a vow etched in blood and fire. The amulet blazed, silver light erupting in a cascade that enveloped them, drawing gasps from the encircling wolves. Energy flowed from her core, a searing river that knit flesh and spirit, the wound closing in threads of lunar glow while shadows of fatigue settled in her bones. Malric shuddered, the guilt's chains snapping as her essence wove into him. Visions of true paths now his to navigate, Alara's ghost laid to rest in the warmth of this new union. The pack's howls erupted in triumph, a symphony under the moon that shook the pines, affirming the rebirth, no longer king and outcast, but equals forged in choice, their bond unbreakable as the mountains themselves. As the light faded, Saris sank into his arms, exhaustion a gentle veil, the amulet cooling to a steady warmth against their joined hearts. The night deepened, the wind carrying away the last echoes of conflict, leaving only the fire's quiet crackle and the pack's vigilant watch. Redemption bloomed in the silence, not as reward, but as the hard-won harmony of wounds healed through sacrifice, love's proof in the face of despair. The moon crested high, silvering the snow in benediction, as dawn's promise stirred on the horizon, a realm reborn, guided by compassion's enduring flame. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.